Taylor Lakhryst was an undecided voter who took part in a CBC program called Face to Face during last year's federal election campaign. While being on the show gave her a chance to ask questions of a party leader, she felt CBC's production choices spoiled the experience by making her appear inept and powerless. Hello fellers and dwellers, welcome to another episode of Dwell On It, a series where I, Taylor, answer your questions about my lived experience as a trans woman. If you're new to the channel, what Dwell On It is, as I just mentioned, answering your questions about my lived experience, and it's not exclusive to that either. Sometimes questions come in about, just general life philosophy. Do you like cats or dogs, hot dogs or hamburgers, PlayStation, Xbox, whatever, so you can throw them at me either way. The point of Dwell On It is to help humanize trans individuals. There's so much attention, negative attention against trans individuals, and so much of a political siege against trans individuals. There's pretty much nothing less than an assault against trans individuals, and so my goal with Dwell On It is to help normalize the conversation, to help educate individuals who might not know things that are important to know, or to help inspire people who do know the things but not know how to, help share the message, help save trans lives. So please subscribe if you haven't, and this goes to returning viewers as well who are not new to the channel and have not subscribed yet. Please hit like if you enjoy the content. Liking does some things, like I mentioned in other episodes, about nudging and bumping algorithms, and honestly what it does too is it helps put this content into the attention of people who might not necessarily want to see it. And what I mean by that is I've got a pretty left-wing bias. I don't think that's too much of a surprise, and sometimes these algorithms would put this video content into right-wing eyes, ears, and attention. It's risky, but it's important too to help hopefully inspire and educate people as it is necessary. Hitting like does help a lot. I know, like I said, it comes with a risk of harassment and abuse and so on, but this information has to get shared to people who have an opportunity to create meaningful change. And so I mentioned sharing too. Please make sure to hit that share button. Share it with your networks, whether it's by hitting the share button as I mentioned, or copy paste a link into an email or a text message. Do me a solid, help get this message into the awareness of other people too. I say it all the time that my reach is only as far as I can reach, and so you are the people who I need the most to help me out when it comes to getting this message to people who I don't currently have access to. I'm going to start quickly with a visual description. I'm hopefully going to work out right away, and so hopefully it looks like that too. I am currently wearing a purple sweater, and it's a black and purple workout top. I've got my hair tied back. It's long and blonde, right? But obviously being in a ponytail, we can't see too much of that. Naked face. I've got my 3 piercings, as always, underneath my right eye in a small, medium, large fashion, going outwards towards a cluster earring at the top of my right ear. I've got 2 stud piercings and a nose piercing. I'm a 6'1" white transgender woman, and just in my living room / gym / office as always. To the side of me are 3 pieces of cardio equipment. I've got my treadmill, my elliptical, and my recumbent bike. There's a mirror on the wall. I've got a lamp behind me. Midday as well again, so we can kind of assume what the lighting is like, even though the blinds are open, but they're not letting all the sunlight in. Otherwise, I think we can dive into this episode. I know I mentioned that typically this content is about answering random questions from people who want to watch it. I'm going to be very transparent that as much as I have a lot of capacity to advocate, today is a little more difficult than usual. I received some news from someone incredibly close to me. They're dealing with something traumatic right now, and that's where my mind and my heart is. The last 2 episodes, if you watch them, I'm a fireball. I'm going off like nobody's business. That's the business brain working. That stuff is so effortless for me because it's logical. Hey, this has to get done because it has to get done. Here's all the proof in the pudding. Here's why. Here's why. Here's why. Act now, save trans lives. So easy. And in this case, like I said, someone super close to me is dealing with some trauma right now, considering how the last 3 odd years have been for so many people. That trauma is becoming such a regular part of all of our lexicon. That's where my head is. So what I'm going to do this week, instead of answering random questions, I'm going to discuss the review from CBC's ombudsman about my concern that I raised for my appearance on CBC's The National Face-to-Face before Canada's federal election last year. I think that's just kind of the easiest way to minimize excessive thought processing, and also staying on point for something that is important for trans rights, trans visibility. Take a look at the review, read it, and get a better understanding about how media and journalism, as much as they want to provide visibility, also create representation When it's all said and done, media is a business. Journalism is a business. It's an industry, right? It's not a social service. It's not a community service. It's all about money. I want to take a moment just to dedicate this episode to that person that I was talking about. This person is, with no question, one of the most important pillars of my life. I wouldn't be where I am today without them. I can't say that I wouldn't be here physically, but I can say the person who I am would not be the person who I am without them being part of, my life's journey. And for them to just be going through some trauma right now is obviously very important to me, so I want to dedicate this episode to them, and I hope they're doing okay. I just wanted to say a message personally to them, even though I doubt that they're going to watch this, because obviously their head's in a very important place right now that's probably not watching YouTube videos. I'm here to support you for anything you need. I love you to pieces, and I'll do anything and everything to help support you through this trauma. You've helped me through crisis. You've helped me go through some of my worst times, and you know darn well that I'm not going to just watch and observe you go through some of your worst. If there's anything for the viewers watching this right now, reach out to the people who you love. Check in on them. It's the same message that, we've all heard time and time again. It's funny, as a matter of fact, this is totally unrelated. I saw an article come up the other day about how appreciated it is for people to check in on other people randomly. I'll actually share it as a link in the description, so please make sure to check that out. Check in on the people who you love. Make sure they're doing okay. Make sure they know that you're there for them. If they need it, they can be vulnerable with you, and make sure to remind them that you trust them enough to be vulnerable with them, should that ever be necessary too. One thing that our society struggles with is expecting everyone to bear all the burdens ourselves, and also have no problem saying that, hey, I'll be there to support you through this, that, and the other thing. But then as soon as it gets to the heavy stuff, they're like, oh no, I'm not equipped for that. It's important to set boundaries, but don't set boundaries that seem limitless and then all of a sudden start creating boundaries when someone needs you the most, I think is the message that I'm trying to say. To just repeat that, I love you tons. I'm sorry that you're experiencing what you're experiencing right now. I'm ready to listen whenever you need to talk, but also know that you don't need to talk to get support. And I want everyone to make sure that other people share that with their loved ones as well. Sometimes people don't need talk, but sometimes they still need help. And whether that means just making sure that their house is clean, or their bills are paid, or meals are prepared, or whatever, you can still do all those things without invading the privacy of somebody else. Because when people go through trauma, their energy is best spent on focusing on dealing with that trauma, whatever it is. Trauma is subjective, remember that. I could stub my toe and define that as trauma, and then other people can break their leg and be like, yeah, well, I broke the other one the other day, so that'll happen. Trauma is subjective, but that doesn't diminish how impactful it is for a person who is experiencing trauma. And while they are able to go through that experience at their own pace, a line that I said a long time ago that got captured, as a matter of fact, by a local community service here was, grieving is a process, not a procedure. And so when it comes to things like trauma, it's the same thing. You don't need to hurry somebody along through their trauma and tell them that they're dealing with it long enough, whatever it may be. You can still be supportive while respecting their need to cope. I know that's a bit of a rough opener, but like I said, my capacity for this specific episode is elsewhere. So let's just find our way through this. If there's one thing to take away aside from the usual like, share, subscribe, is check in on the people who you love and just make sure they're doing okay. There's a lot of times where someone needs you, but they don't have the capacity to ask because they're already beat up, and the last thing they want to do is expose themselves with vulnerability or shame. And sometimes they just need that outreach to know that there's support for them. So let's get into this here. To recap what this Ombudsman's review was about was my experience on CBC The National's Face to Face. I had a segment where I asked ErinOToole, who was the former Conservative Party leader of Canada, about how they plan on addressing bigotry and transphobia. My concern with the experience was in threefold. One, I was unable to express my questions in a way that were as authentic and powerful that I would have liked. I described the phrasing as the question being negotiated with the producers, who seemed leery that I would use inappropriate language. I was unhappy with the way my conversation with Mr. O'Toole was edited. And three, I was especially displeased with how my bio, my video intro, was presented to the audience. I felt that CBC watered my visibility, my presentation to Canada, to all the viewers who were watching it at that time, down very much compared to who I feel I am as an individual. Of course, there's going to be a link to this review as well in the description of this video, so please make sure to take a look at it and see the full review. I feel it's very well written. I still think there's a couple gaps of things that could have been discussed, but again, there's only so much that you can really say in a blog in response of a review without hyper-analyzing every single sentence. And a lot of the email exchange that I was having with CBC, their points were, to me, rather low effort, or if not low effort, was, oh, well, you know, we didn't think we did anything wrong. Well, that's great, but I'm telling you, you did something wrong, right? Not thinking you did something wrong does not mean something wrong didn't happen, so let's start addressing that. You know, the whole going to school and you do a math exercise and your teacher hands it back saying it was wrong. You can't just say, well, I thought I did it right, because the teacher's going to go back and say, well, the answer's still wrong no matter how well you thought you did it. This is kind of the exact same thing. The counterpoints were hefty. This response would have been miles long if we wanted to break down every single thing that could have been a better opportunity for this experience. I do recognize the opportunity to present myself to the nation with concerns that are important to me, and I do appreciate the opportunity. I would like to make sure to let that be known, right? That I'm not looking a gift horse in the mouth. I'm not regretful of the experience or anything like that. I know that by doing this experience, one of two things would have happened. They either would have represented me with full authenticity, which would to me have been incredibly powerful, or they would have represented me how they wanted to represent me, which is what I expected to happen, and it would provide me an opportunity to raise visibility about this. I already had this in my head. So to repeat what was paraphrased from Mr. Nagler with the review was, your complaint to my office was about the way you were edited and presented by CBC. While you expressed gratitude for the opportunity to provide visibility on the subject of abuse towards the 2S LGBTQIA+ community, you felt that CBC made choices which diluted your appearance. It left you feeling, if not misrepresented, then underrepresented. And I'm gonna lean on that in a little bit, because there continued to be responses from CBC about misrepresenting. And frankly, I barked back saying, stop using that word, because that's not what I said. I said underrepresenting. And there's a big difference between that, or there's a big difference behind that. So as I mentioned, this episode is going to focus on the review that was created by Jack Nagler, CBC's ombudsman, about my appearance on CBC The National Face-to-Face. I think the headline of it is fantastic as well. How presentation affects representation. Taylor Lakhryst was an undecided voter who took part in a CBC program called Face-to-Face during last year's federal election campaign. While being on the show gave her a chance to ask questions of a party leader, she felt CBC's production choices spoiled the experience by making her appear inept and powerless. And what I did immediately after watching the episode go on air was hop on YouTube and put a pretty clunky video together, if I had to be completely honest. It was literally the first one that I did that involved any sort of audio editing with the software that I use, Reaper. I'm gonna put that video right here. Please make sure to check it out. You'll hear a lot more raw feedback of how that experience felt to me at the time. Just be mindful about the quality of content from then, and well, mind you, I continue to try to do better every time I release a new episode, but that's aside from the point. Let's acknowledge this was incredibly short notice compared to other election cycles and whatnot, so everybody who was providing videos and whatnot didn't have production teams or anything like that to optimize, here, let's do this, let's do that, what are the interests that you have, and so on. It was all up to the participants to come up with something. That said, in that other video that I was just mentioning a little bit ago, CBC did provide guidelines of what to provide for information. They gave kind of a structure, a flow of, bring up, obviously who you are, where you're from, what do you do for work, what are your hobbies, what are your interests, what's most important to you, is there anything else, was pretty much how it went. So they still gave a workflow, and then it was up to them to put something together based on those things. My concern out of all of that is they took my passions, like my passions, like what drives me to wake up every day, and threw it on the side, and they decided to stick with something that was cheek pinching and head patting so that it wouldn't ruffle the feathers of all the lunchbox politicians who are sitting on the couch at 7 p.m. and not disrupt their comfort with strong language or the idea that a trans woman actually is inspired to create change in a country that's oppressing trans people. Can't have that. It was so predictable. It was so predictable. It was so predictable from right out of the gate. I want to make sure that's very clear. It was so predictable, but I made sure to do the best that I can to endure it because I knew the visibility in some capacity was important. And I also knew that if I decided to get really abrasive, I guess I should say, and be like, no, I'm doing this, I'm saying this, or however, I'd lose the opportunity for the visibility in general. So I knew that I had to concede, but I also knew that by seeing these things already happen before they happened, I knew I was going to be raising a concern to the ombudsman, and I knew there was going to be additional visibility out of it. And then all I can hope is that with this extra visibility becomes further conversation about how presentation and representation are critical, especially when it comes to underrepresented communities in our country, and not even just Canada. Obviously, it's anywhere else in the world too. Marginalized people continue to stay marginalized because of the stereotypes that get put upon them by the people who are not marginalized. Whether it's by tropes, right, or stereotypes as I mentioned, or blatant misinformation, or the suppression of things that are important. All of those things continue to keep vulnerable people in vulnerable positions by not giving the education or information necessary to the communities who need to hear those things. One of the things that was most frustrating, and perhaps to me felt to be the most naive response from one of the producers, we noticed on some social platforms that your segment from Face to Face was highlighted as being of the utmost importance on an issue that had not been placed front and center in the campaign until your appearance on the program. Okay, from my experience, I saw a whole lot of trolling and bigotry and transphobia compared to the amount of people saying, hey, this is neat. So either they've got some pretty unique off-to-the-side social media platforms that nobody gets to see, or they don't recognize harmful language about trans individuals, overwhelming support for trans individuals. That's something as well that I challenged them on, asking, are you going to address the bigoted comments in your platforms and either comment on them or remove them or whatnot, because there's no place for hate speech? But that's another story. That was such a naive answer. And at that point, that's where in my head it just kind of turned off. I'm like, all right, you're only focused on your ratings and your feel goods. I get it. Cool. Awesome. So when the review came about, Mr. Nagler extracted 3 parts of what I felt were really strong statements in multiple levels of correspondence regarding this. One of the largest parts of the concern, and quite likely thinking about it, was probably the most impassioned part. And I think I stole that word from this review somewhere because I normally don't say that, but nonetheless, was about how they manipulated my bio. I want to make sure this is clear. In the review, he even points out the fact that CBC has, all the rights to create what they want, but there's also responsibility to create things as they find suitable. And it makes sense, right? That's TV magic. But I even do it. There might be something that I said 5 minutes ago that's going to show up here. There's going to be something that I said 13 minutes ago that's going to show up 3 minutes earlier. Who knows? Right? So I get it, as long as the flow is consistent. There's also a seriousness about what are we trying to say? And again, part of the reason why I edit my own videos is I don't want to send this off to someone else to get it done, because I don't want them to create a story that is not what I wanted to put together. Now, granted, it's usually front to back, but sometimes there's things that I don't know if it came out the way I wanted it to say, or I was able to find a way to say it again a little stronger, or perhaps say it with maybe a little less impact or whatever. Those are things that I know because I'm the one sharing the message. And so I don't want to leave it to some third party to go ahead and do their best guess, and then I look at it and be like, well, it's not really what I wanted. Now, granted, are the odds of that happening high? No, because my content, like I said, is rather organic. But I know the message that I want to say. I don't want to leave it to another person to reinterpret my message and create something that they think is better. I'm totally aware of the fact that when I provided the material for them to work with, and I gave them many cuts and takes and this and that, you know, whether it was segments of one of the questions, right, and answer the one question independently and then do a full thing or however it goes, so they can go ahead and pick and choose what they would want to make it into quality content. I gave them as much as I could to work with so that they can still create a story that is real, authentic, and strong, and not be limited with what they can do. If I can go ahead and put some dumpy video together, I'm pretty sure that the people at CBC can do something with a little more elegance. You know what I mean? That's what's in my head. If I can hack a video together and still get the point across, pretty sure the people at CBC have a lot more talent to do that than I do. Nonetheless, my focus was how they created my bio. The reason why that was really important to me is that's the presentation to Canada. Hi, I'm Taylor. I'm a trans woman. That alone is automatically going to get a positive or negative reaction. And so what happens after that is so critical about who I am. And instead of focusing on things like dealing with online abuse, fundraising for mental health awareness, doing a grassroots group to try to help inspire change, being concerned about trans inclusion in sports. Hi, I love softball and karaoke. Well, anyway, see my point? The things that are so critical to the reasons why I wake up, and they chose the easy route because it doesn't bother people. People can relate to sports and karaoke. People can't relate to trans inclusion in sports. People can't relate to being inspired to create change. So CBC wanted to deal with making sure that the people who don't want to feel upset don't get upset. And that's what bothered me the most, especially considering the topic was about bigotry and transphobia, and they applied bigotry and transphobia. I acknowledge that it wasn't overt, let's just put it that way, but watering me down, diminishing my strengths, diminishing my visibility, diminishing my worth. What is that if not for we don't want to hear about you? We just want to make sure that everybody else stays happy. I emphasized how problematic it was that the video seemed to emphasize my love for sports and karaoke while omitting more substantive comments about the importance of placing responsibility for bigotry and hate-based abuse on the abusers themselves rather than the victims. And even setting that omission aside, I expressed discomfort for the way CBC had edited my comments. Let's not forget that I'm an undecided voter because, and let's be leaders because, were extracted from two completely different sections of what I provided. So they created that line, not me, and so that reinforces the whole accuracy thing. I know I mentioned a little bit ago that you can go ahead and create sentences however we want. What my point was by that is they literally acknowledged some of the strongest stuff that I spoke about and chopped all of that out just to complete a sentence that they're happy with. I'm not going to get into all of the scripting and everything like that because that's in that one video that I mentioned. Please check it out. I'd love you to check it out. And it's also written in here in this review. I don't think I need to repeat it. I emphasized that before the program, that I'd been told these videos would be between 35 and 45 seconds. I stated that I followed all the directives given to me in advance by producers, yet I was the only one of the 4 participants given less than 40 seconds of airtime in my video. I asked to consider how these videos of other participants were edited and whether or not I was treated fairly in that issue. I don't know if I used the word fairly, but I'm just being, what's the word I'm looking for? Pedantic? Is that what it is? Mainly because I don't like using the word fair, because fair is subjective or whatnot, but nonetheless, the directives that I was given was within a certain time frame, and I acknowledge that there's editing that's going to be done. That's why I gave as much content as I did, so they can make sure to find the most optimal things to use to put within that time frame. One of the things I was hearing from one of the producers who I was on the phone with was they were insisting that they wanted to keep things focused on one point. They didn't want to kind of be all over the place with a bunch of different ideas. But my counterpoint to that was, pay attention to the other videos and how many of them stuck on one topic. The guest that was on after me, I believe it was the one right after me, and it might have been the last one, but they had multiple points of issue. What that producer was saying was trying to deflect me immediately. And furthering that, when they were insisting that they were within that time frame, I took a screen cap of the bio itself with a timestamp, and right at the moment of the transition from when the edit ended to when camera cut to live was 28 seconds. I literally pointed on the transition mark to be like, no, what you're saying is empirically wrong. This is 28 seconds. It's not even the minimum that you recommended. So stop BSing me. And my concern with that was, When the other individuals were able to go ahead and ramble on about this, that, and the other thing, and all the things that make every other Canadian happy and comfortable with family and students and business and money and this and that, they all get more airtime to share their concerns. But my concerns about bigotry and abuse and hate and responsibility on others that aren't the people who are getting violated, all of those get cut out. 12 seconds is a lot of time and not a lot of time, and I fully acknowledge that. But what I'm saying, there was very clearly a reason why mine was limited while theirs was not within the recommended time frame. Mr. Nagler goes into conversation later about how it's important for flow to happen with TV and production. I get that. I can see from my own analytics in my own videos, I can tell when people drop off. I can tell when people spike up. I can tell when people care. I can tell when people don't care. It's even something that I was mentioning in last week's episode, which I'll put right here in case you haven't seen it yet, but it's about keeping the attention of goldfish. Because people have such a small attention span, it's important to keep a pace, a flow, an interest and so on. It's important for all of those things to happen. There's still a compromise. When people have important things to say, that is an important thing to recognize. Now, it's up to you to decide, is it more important to keep people happy or is it important to get important things heard? That's a decision for me that's easy to answer. Get the important things heard. But because CBC is a business, because media is a business, their concern is about keeping people happy. And that's where it turned into a major clash. I suffered at the expense of capitalism. To sum it up in a nutshell, I know it makes it sound all hyperbolic, but that's pretty much how it gets summed up in a nutshell. My introduction with ErinOToole started with asking pronouns. I felt that was very important to do, and I was optimistic that CBC would have embraced that as well. Because again, when it comes to inclusion, when it comes to gender identity, one of the easiest things that can get done is ensuring that an exchange of pronouns, or at least an opportunity to share pronouns, is there, and it helps normalize the conversation. CBC edited out of their broadcasts of what got on TV. They kept it in something that got posted on their website, but how many people decide to go to watch little nuanced corners of, online news as opposed to tuning in to CBC at 7 p.m. or whenever it was? There's a big difference, and I pointed that out. Why edit that out of the broadcast that I assume have the highest viewership? I understand again about pace. You can edit, that question and still keep it in there without disrupting pace. That was a decision that was made to not upset people. That was an intentional decision. I don't care what anyone else says. That was a fundamentally conscious decision, because heaven forbid the leader of a conservative party acknowledges and answers a question about their pronouns. That was deliberate. That has nothing to do about timing. I totally get about how 5 seconds here or there matters. So then take the 5 seconds here or there from somewhere else instead of something that is critically important to discuss. I reserved my most impassioned critique for CBC's defense of its edits to my introductory video. One of the producers asserted that the program did not misrepresent my experience or point of view, and I said that, in fact, my voice was continually diluted, and that even happened during the exchange because it was like just not listening, you're not paying attention. And with that, one of my responses, which I feel is one of my strongest ones out of that, was everyone at CBC has a responsibility to stop defending misrepresentation and start acknowledging underrepresentation. Misrepresenting is not what I said. I never once said I was misrepresented. I said I kept getting watered down, diluted. They're two completely different things, and stuff like this will continue until people recognize the difference. They presented me in a way that was palatable for people who do not want to care. They presented me in a way that would not distress people beyond their understanding of trans individuals already. They underrepresented me. One of the biggest concerns from the producer that I spent the most time on the phone with was ensuring that I don't use language that would upset other Canadians so much to the point where they would contact CBC's ombudsman about the episode. So because they diluted me as much as they did and underrepresented me, I contacted the ombudsman instead. Mr. Nagler's review starts with, "Your complaint is first and foremost a reminder that the stories journalists tell are not really theirs. They're the stories of real people with real lives, real ambitions, and real concerns. It's obvious that the way you were presented to the audience matters to you. It is extremely personal, all the more so because at the moment you were a de facto representative of the trans community whose members so regularly face the very bigotry and abuse that inspired your question. There are not billions of trans people in Canada, let alone the world. Trans visibility on a national stage is rare. How many viewers were watching that segment? That many people were paying attention, and that's not counting how many people watched on YouTube, read the news articles, this, that, and whatever. My representation was very limited for what people know about trans people. And even though I had a tiny window to work with, there was a big difference between just saying, "Hi, I'm Taylor, I'm trans, I like sports and karaoke, versus, "Hi, my name is Taylor. We have a crisis about abuse against trans individuals. Here are my goals to change it. How else is this party planning on helping with that too?" There's a massive difference behind that, and CBC opted for the safe route. The rest of the review as a whole is what I imagined. It, kind of explored the nuances of everything when it comes to how the production team put whatever together, the content that I provided. Mr. Nagler was very thorough, watching my YouTube video, taking a look at all the raw content, looking at all the content that was provided by the other participants and so on. And so I feel very strongly that Mr. Nagler was thorough about everything. And even when I was on the phone with him, that, we had, really good conversation of, just making sure that he's understanding what my concerns were. And honestly, he was like, "I can do a review, but I don't know if there's something you would consider to be a win that I could write." And I'm like, I'm not looking for a win. I'm not looking for any bias on anything. I don't think there's anything that I would consider a failure of JSP, for example, like, what is it, Journalism Standards and Practices, or however it goes. I don't think that there's anything in there that, like, I could take to court, for example, or anything like that. It's the fact that there was an opportunity to do the right thing, but they didn't do it. They opted for safety, they opted for comfort, they opted for convenience, while being able to follow all the fun JSP standards. But that also stopped authenticity. That affected, quite likely, the outcome of the program. It could have affected conversation. My specific writing off the top of my head was just a few dozen votes before a recount. Who knows if that could have made a difference? And I know for sure that people in my writing watched that episode because I went grocery shopping a couple days after it went on air, and I was stopped at the store by someone asking if I was on TV on Sunday. People watched that episode. People know I'm there, and perhaps people would care more or not care more, for all I know. But by not being able to show the strength and passion that I have, like sports and karaoke, that could have affected the outcome. I wasn't expecting a W in terms of this review, but the consciousness and the awareness for journalists, for reporters, to stop focusing on the dollar, stop focusing on the clicks, stop focusing on making sure that people enjoy your content, and start telling the stories for what they are, is what I want out of this review. And frankly, to sum it up, that is what the review is. It's exactly as I expected. And as I was mentioning, Mr. Nagler was going through, the kind of the details of everything here. I don't need to repeat too much of it. That said, there's one part that really started to encapsulate what my concern was. At the same time, it's clear that those producers took two risks with your video. One, by moving around your sentence, let's be leaders and role models for the rest of the world. And like I was saying, is like they literally snipped out all of the important stuff and just put the bookends together, made a magazine, and insisted that it was a novel. And the other, by making my bio 28 seconds when the other three participants were over 40 seconds. What is that? Somewhere between 30 and 40% of a difference? I think that's relevant when you put it into that way. That was a pretty significant cut compared to what other people were able to present themselves to the nation with. But like I said, the other three had so much more relatable content for Canadians to want to enjoy. So Taylor likes sports and karaoke though. People like sports and karaoke, right? On the first risk, I would say that the edit was probably benign. It's hard to imagine that it distorted your philosophy. However, it was a presumptuous edit on CBC's part to take a sentence that called for Canada to be a leader on inclusion and gender identity and attach it instead to a sentence on ending bigotry and abuse. While CBC has freedom under the JSP to make those edits and warned me in advance that they would be editing things for these videos, which I already acknowledge, it would have been more respectful and more courteous to let you know in advance that this was happening just in case it might have created a problem that producers did not foresee. Case in point, cis people talking for trans people about trans issues. Cis people are to amplify the trans individual's message, not to reframe the message in a way that they feel cis people would better understand. Trans people know what trans people are saying about trans-related things. That's how it goes. And so if they said, hey, Taylor, we don't know if we can use this as it is because it just doesn't seem to fit the flow, can we communicate? That's a different story. But to take my words and turn it into not my words, yet claim they're my words, it's a difficult take. Again, I acknowledge that I put myself in a position of having things edited, but this is the consciousness and the awareness that this isn't about just reporting on a sports team. This isn't about reporting on the price of gold. This is about lives. This is about awareness. This is about bigotry and transphobia. This is about stuff that people who are editing have no concept of what they're editing. So to just think they're doing the right thing is a pretty risky thing to do. I would have liked to see CBC take this step in particularly because the question of representation is so significant and omnipresent for the trans community. It does not mean that CBC would cede editorial control, but it might lead to more informed choices. I really appreciate that brought up by Mr. Nagler. On the second risk, I suppose there could have been better communication between you and CBC on the length of the video. When producers told me to prepare something between 35 and 45 seconds, I took that as a sign that'd be a firm min-max. The further of that review, frankly, is just explaining the don't assume that people know what you're talking about sort of stuff, like especially when it comes to the producers and vice versa. But the most important thing that I looked at was they gave me a guideline for an assumed time. The time of my representation was so limited compared to the others, and the content that they decided to create with that time that they allocated for me was so weak. It could have been 10 seconds for all I care, as long as it was substantive, but it wasn't. It's not all about time, but more like, why did my time have so much less visibility as the others and also not have anything actually worth talking about? Lastly, on your frustration that the question that you asked on the show was negotiated. First, when I heard that word, I was worried that it meant programmers were forcing you to ask the questions that they wanted rather than the ones you wanted. So it's kind of funny, as a matter of fact, too. There's a lot of anti-CBC media publications who are really capturing this part, and they put it in their own publications and whatnot, as well as CBC is editing people's statements and coaching people on things of what to say. I was the one coaching. I was trying to address the fact that on a daily basis I am continually stalked, harassed, called a pedophile by a network of bigots, so on and the other thing. And CBC's producers like, well, we don't really want to say that. And I'm saying, no, you want to say that because that's how you tell people what's happening. I went into more detail about that in that video that I mentioned earlier, so check that out. But I'm the one coaching CBC saying, no, these are the things to say. CBC was pleading with me to dilute that, is what happened. I'm fine with the right-wing media going ahead and trying to chew on CBC, because if this holds them to account for not allowing authenticity to really be carried through, own your mistakes. If there's any coaching that CBC did, it was more along the lines of how to stay respectful when it comes to the questions, you know, how to ask impactful questions. As a matter of fact, something that was a big takeaway from me out of that was to ask a direct question. What would you like to do? How would you like to see? What are your plans for? That's something that never really was part of, you know, my lexicon in the past. I would usually leave questions not ambiguous, but they wouldn't be commanding an answer. That was one of the biggest takeaways, and I've got gratitude for that. CBC didn't coach any of my questions. I knew what I wanted to say. They were asking me to not say the words that would make someone go, she said the word pedophile. They were doing everything that they can to make sure that I don't say words that would upset people. They were doing what they can to make sure that I don't say the words that upset Canadians. They were asking me to be like, is there any way you can say things that are important but not with those types of words because we don't want to deal with the headache? They weren't coaching me on what to say. And I knew that if I wanted to have any sort of visibility, I needed to concede. I'm not happy that I had to concede because those are words and language that I want to use. When we talk about bigotry and transphobia, people think about jeers against queers and that's it. They don't realize the severity of the harm. They don't realize the type of language that gets used. They don't realize the consequence of the language that gets used. They don't realize those things, and they will never realize those things unless that is brought to their face. But instead, they just wanted representation. So I did what I could with what I had, and the rest is history. And Mr. Nagler points out at the end of the review here, you agreed to this in order to take part of the program, and I commend you for that. Even if it diluted some of the power of the message you hope to deliver, your presence on the show packed a memorable punch. A quick summation of my review is there was no violation of journalistic standards on the part of the program. However, the concerns you have expressed include good lessons for the producers of future programs about more effective methods to be inclusive, respectful, fair, and considerate. So I'm going to wrap this one up. This again got longer than I expected, but again, passion does things. So please make sure to take a look at the links that I've provided. There was the video that I shared earlier. I've mentioned numerous times already episodes 54 and 55, which are incredibly important videos to have as many people watch and share. So between the media is transphobic video, Canada is voting to police women's bodies video, the talking to goldfish video, give them a watch. Please make sure to give them likes. Please make sure to share them. If you have not subscribed yet, please make sure to subscribe. I'm going to close this video off with a reminder to everyone to just make sure to take care of the people you love. And, oftentimes take care of the people you don't love. If there's someone you love and if there's something in your gut saying that it's an important time to check in on them, please make sure to do that. As a matter of fact, that I had an alarm go off while recording this to check in on that person I was talking about earlier, and that's going to be the next thing I do. It's important when people are going through trauma to let them know that they're not obligated to deal with trauma alone, and how they are feeling is valid no matter how they're feeling, and support is there if and when is necessary. So please make sure to take care of the people you love, because you don't know what could ever happen. The only thing we can control is ourselves in this exact picosecond of time. So we have no idea what the future has in store for us, and so don't let that get wasted. This person I was talking about is watching this video. A reminder to you, I love you tons, and I've got your back. Just remember that. Everyone else, have a great rest of your night. Have a great rest of your week, as I love to say. Thanks for going through this journey with me. Hopefully next week can be much more jubilant. And I'll talk to you later.